So please join in and welcoming Julia Kennewell.
Okay. Well, William Younghusband, he's haunted me for years, asking me to tell his story from 200 odd years ago. And I've known about him for decades. But I only really got interested in him when our bloods mingled, because my husband Jeff is his great-great-great-grandson, and the wonderful Mr. Billy, to whom Paul just referred, is his sixth great-grandson. So I'm not even sure I like William Younghusband, but I respect him. He's done lots of things with his life, and let's just have a quick look at some of them, if we can. There he is, isn't he gorgeous? So I'm putting this up now because we will run out of time and you won't get to see all the things he did. So he has been on the Church Society, might debate about that. Trustee of St George's Church, might debate about that too. Adelaide Insurance Agents for the Underwriters Association of Liverpool. That's because when he first came to South Australia, there were no insurance companies, so he had to insure his cargoes in Sydney. So he couldn't wait to set up insurance companies. So we won't go through all of them, but as you can see, he was a very busy boy. And I put that up there to shame you all, so that next time I hear one of you say, I don't have time, you just think about William, because he was only in Australia for a little over 20 years, and this is what he did with his life. So no excuses, guys. But before we even get on to William, we're going to go back a few more hundred years to the American Revolution, 1781 to be precise, because William's grandfather sailed his ship, the Betsy, to Virginia, taking military men and supplies, and he got caught up in the most decisive battle of the American Revolution, called the Siege of Yorktown. General Cornwallis was in place in a camp in Yorktown on the James River, and he was being chased down by the French and the Continental Army, and he made the decision to deliberately sink his entire fleet of over 20 odd ships of military and commercial shipping. And that should have been that. But these people are very big on seeking attention. Nearly 200 years later, the Virginia Department of Historic Resources decided to mount a huge project, and they built a cofferdam in the James River and lifted the Betsy up. This was Joseph Younghusband's ship. Lifted the Betsy up, extracted 5,000 artefacts of it, and built a small part of the ship as a scale model so that they could see how it had been constructed. And through that effort, they were actually able, with a little bit of help from our family history research, to figure out who owned the ship and where it came from. They actually pulled apart the sarking in between the planks and had it analysed and discovered it came from a particular area in Cumberland. And they used other forensic techniques to track it back to this very small group of potential ships. We were lucky enough in 2003 to go into the back rooms of that museum and actually handle some of the artefacts off that ship. So we had buckles and belts, and there's the Betsy there, there's his ship. They built a scale replica of that at the Waterman's Museum. I took that photograph of that bottle, and here, some of the things salvaged were these little cannonballs. Now that project lost funding, and those cannonballs sat on a shelf in a warehouse for 30 years nearly, and then one day a researcher thought, got some funding, I'm going to go back and have a look at those artefacts. And when she looked at them, she opened a plastic bag and a strange smell wafted up. And she had it analysed and she found the crystals of gunpowder. They had offered us to take one of those cannonballs home. And we said, hell yeah, but we were flying so we couldn't. So we left it there, and then nearly 20 years after we were there, they had to get the bomb squad in and detonate those devices because they were actually hand grenades. They had been encased in metal, and in the bottom of the river for that long, the metal had disintegrated, and that's what they were left with, and that's how they packed them for the bomb squad to take them out and detonate them. So that was a little bit of a fun fact about his grandfather. The guy who did that, all of that work, was a guy by the name of John Broadwater, and he lost his funding shortly after we saw him, and he had to go on and move on to other projects. This is the guy that took us through that tour of the museum. He was lucky he lost his funding, because since then he's descended in the 2 mere submersibles to the depths of the Titanic with oceanographer James Cameron. He's recovered sunken F1 engines from Amazon's Jeff Bezos from the Saturn V boosters that launched the Apollo astronauts to the moon, and he's become founder and president of his own Spirit Sail Enterprises, which do underwater archaeology. There's a fabulous article in National Geographic, it's only back in a little while, June 88, about that, and it is just amazing what they went through and what they discovered. So let's get back to William. This is where he's from, Port City of Whitehaven in Cumberland. Pretty little place. I don't know how many of you are familiar with the American Revolutionary War history, but a lot happened there. Some of the people from America didn't like what was happening over there, and they came over and raided Whitehaven and thought, we'll get back at those British. So a couple of 100 years later, well, not that long, 1814, William Younghusband was born, and he was born at a place called Floraville, which was an estate of 4 houses in this little town, in a suburb of this little town actually, called Corkickle. His parents were William and Sarah Younghusband, and the family had a mixed business of shipping and trading and importing and exporting from all of these places around the world. And they ended up in Adelaide and Sydney eventually, but they started out here. So a very interesting family. They built the ships and they travelled in them. They had been landed gentry or yeomen in Cumberland for 200 years previously. So some of William Younghusband's family stayed in Liverpool and Cumberland. He had an older brother, Joseph. I've got a little thing here of Joseph. This is Joseph. Well, it's nearly Joseph. And I tell you this because he comes into play in a little while. He had his own shipping firm, and his shipping firm did all of this as well, but he ended up as part of the Cunard line, so that's not a bad little legacy to have. And his older brother, John Palmer Younghusband, we've got it, here's John, a very swish-looking dude. He inherited his mother's estate. I don't know why him and not the other boys, but he inherited his mother's estate, and he had to change his name. His name was John Palmer Younghusband, and through the courts and with the approval of the Queen, he had to change his name just to John Palmer so he could inherit the estate. That's how the rules were back then. So yeah, there was another younger brother, Edwin. We went to England quite a few years ago and met the English side of the family over there, and they told us that Edwin was an imbecile. Are you allowed to use that word today? Anyway, I said he was. So William Younghusband was married to Louisa Cecilia Thomas. And we know about Louisa Cecilia Thomas because she was from the Thomas family in India. We know that William was a trader. There are some records in the Bengal papers and documents that the family were listed as merchants and masters of vessels in local publications like the Bengal Directories and so on. So William was listed as a master mariner. A master mariner is the highest level of professional qualification amongst mariners and deck officers. That qualification allows the holder of any merchant ship of any size, of any type, to operate anywhere in the world with no limits on tonnage, power or geographic location, whereas a mere captain has restrictions. William was a master mariner at age 19, and that wasn't uncommon. So you can tell that his family sort of put him into training pretty quickly. So at that time, all long-distance communication and transport and trade depended on either horses for overland trade or shipping for international trade and news. And in fact, in those days, many ships carried cargo that was even more important than the physical stuff, and that was the mails, the newspapers, and the just general reports that they had to carry around the world. The news of every ship in every report was widely printed, and if you go to Trove, you'll see it filled with shipping notices. And the reason was because the captain was permanently in the media because he was the media. He was the original social media. Wherever he went, he had to report on what had happened in all the ports he'd just come from. So, was it safe for your family to travel? Was it safe for the trader to export, import? Was it safe for your family to even be there? And as we'll see in a little while, sometimes in India it certainly wasn't. So he would report on plagues, government matters, politics, wars, weather, economies and trade opportunities. So apart from managing his men and managing the media, the other important skill a captain had was networking. Unless he was connected with the other trading houses, he had no hope of knowing where to get a good deal, and he had no hope of being connected into a payment system. So it was pretty important for a captain to be a good networker, and that's why they were such multimedia stars. And this being William's job, he probably started that job at age 6. So little boys of age 6 were put on ships. They got better educations as they went along, but they might have been powder monkeys because they could fit in where the cannons were in poky little holes. They might have transported messages from the captain or the officers around the ship. They probably carried meals around and did all sorts of odd jobs that only a 6-year-old could do. I think it's fair to say that William's early experience, his training, his education, his knowledge of world ports and so on stood in really good stead for what he had coming to him in Australia. So in the late 1830s and 1840s, William's family had at least 2 ships that traded regularly into Australia. One was the Fortfield and the other was the Gunga. Old documents show us that William captained the Gunga around all of those ports that we just saw up there a little while ago, but particularly on Calcutta, Rio de Janeiro and Cape Town. So his ship, the Gunga, arrived in Adelaide from Singapore in June 1840, and he was the captain. There had been earlier visits by that ship, I should say, but it wasn't clear who the captain was, so we're not claiming them. The following month, he left Adelaide and went to Sydney with his unsold cargo, because part of the problem that he faced when he got here was that they packed the wrong cargo, and some of the things that they needed weren't necessarily needed by the settlers here. So that was a reason why he went on to Sydney, and he had his own agency in Sydney as well. In November 1840, he eventually came back again, and this time with really bad news about China. The Chinese actually, that was in the start of the Opium Wars, and the Chinese had thrown the English out of China. They got sick of them. And the reason that happened, I don't know how many of you know about the Opium Wars or what happened, but there's a wonderful book by a guy by the name of Armitage Gosh, and he's given a bit of a summary, and he said what happened was that you may or may not know this, but in 1600 the Queen signed an edict to say only the East India Company could trade into China. No English nationals at that point could trade unless they had a special dispensation. And if you were a well-connected family, you could get that dispensation, but generally only people from the East India Company could trade into China. So the Chinese ended up being sort of ransacked a bit by the Brits. We came in and bought tea from them and then stole their tea cuttings against the law in China, but we did. Planted those tea cuttings in India on land that the Brits had taken over there as well. And they got to the point where there was an imbalance in trade. The English were sending all of their silver bullion at that stage, that's how they were paying for it, over to India, but there was no backload. So the very imaginative English said, I know, we'll sell them opium. And the English and Dutch deliberately, and this is well documented, deliberately got the Chinese people hooked on opium so that they would have a market for their product. So yes, the Chinese were a bit cross, and yes, they booted the English out. So it was at that point that William made his decision, there's this place called South Australia just opening up, better go there. So before we proceed any further with William, we should meet the Thomas sisters. This is Arabella. She got married at 15. Bad luck, her husband died because Calcutta was a pretty horrible place back then. Life there was short, sweet and dangerous. But a few years later, she married this dude because she was now a widow. So when she was 22, she married William Younghusband's brother Joseph. And then William Younghusband and Louisa got married in India. Okay? So Louisa is the third Thomas sister. And then Henrietta and James Ilbery got married. Now I'll show you these pictures so you'll remember these people. And then the younger sister Charlotte came along. Now these girls were only 5, 8, 7 and 1 when their mother died. So, as I said, 15-year-old Arabella married and was widowed, and she married Joseph. 18-year-old Henrietta married James Ilbery. Same year Louisa married William, and then in 1938 Henrietta and Charlotte, where are you Henrietta? Henrietta and Charlotte, 22-year-old Henrietta and 15-year-old Charlotte sailed out of China and went to live in Singapore for a while because it was safe there. But then in 1840, Henrietta came to Australia to meet up with her husband, who she'd been separated from for a while, James Ilbery. Now, James Ilbery was a fairly rich man. He came to Australia on an opium ship. He was the only passenger on the opium ship. He bought the land we now call Floraville, but it was originally called Gawler Farm. And that is sections 12, 13, 16, 17, and later on, sorry. A bit too crazy here. Go back one. Later on, William bought that parcel, but initially, Ilbery bought these parcels of land. I don't know what happened to that. By my calculation, that's kind of about Clonley Park. I'd like to inherit that. I don't know what you think, but I think somebody beat me to it.
Just above Clonley Park.
I think somebody beat me to it. When James Ilbery came here, he came as the consul of Canton. I said to you earlier that in order to trade into China, you had to have special favours and special connections. His dad was from the famous Ilbery watchmaking family in London, and they got, his dad William was appointed as, what was he? London, he was a consular representative of the King of Prussia. This is how you did it. You see, you went to court and you got an appointment outside of the East India Company, so without their oversight, you went to some other European country and said, can I be your consul in China? And they said, pay us some money? Sure you can. Sure you can. So James Ilbery, armed with papers from King George as the Hanoverian consul at Canton, came out here with his cousin, J.W.H. Ilbery, who was the vice consul at Macau. They were 16 and 17 when they were the consuls in China. That's, if you've got teenage kids now, go home and say to them, you lazy little so-and-sos, I just heard a story about people that were doing international trade. So, James Ilbery arrived here on the opium ship James Holmes, and he was already a wealthy man, and he had silk and china to sell here on his arrival. So he acquired this land, he acquired and set up the Stockkeep Inn, now known as the Old Spot Hotel at Salisbury. And in the colonial residence microfiche for 1840, he was listed as a cultivator at Little Para Pass with one public house, one dwelling house, stockyards, and a well 45 deep feet deep, containing 8 feet of water, if that is of any interest. Now his property at North Para on the Gawler River, he had 6 acres of wheat, 3 of potatoes and 74 of cattle. If any of you want a mental idea of what 6 acres is, draw yourself a mental line along Murray Street, up Kelton Road, along High Street, down Lindock Road. That area is approximately 6 acres. So that's how big his farm was initially, but it grew. So they had that land, and then he got charged with cattle stealing. We don't really know how or why that happened. He says, "I didn't do it, Your Honour." But he was imprisoned in the Adelaide jail, and the sentence for cattle ducking back then was automatically transportation for life. So James Ilbery was sent to Tasmania for life. Now somehow or other, he managed, with the help of some friends, I guess, to get one of his staff to say, "Oh, actually it was me, I did it, it wasn't James." So James was doing hard labour in Tasmania for 1 year, but the governor intervened and said, "You can come back, James." So James came back, and what did he do? James was married to Henrietta. He said, "See you later, Henrietta. I'm running off to Tasmania with your sister Charlotte." So they've gone. In the middle of all of that, Henrietta's pregnant. Now I've done the math. I think it's possible James was the father. It's also possible William and Henrietta got together, because eventually Henrietta went back to India and left her son in the care of Louisa and William Younghusband. And then 11 years later, she died. Now, when all of this business about James going to jail came up, the family were very clever and they pulled a Swiftie. Somehow, Charlotte, where are you, Charlotte? Here she is. Somehow Charlotte managed to wrangle a lease and release it's called, over the property, because in those days, with the kind of property ownership that they had, in that same year that he got sprung for cattle duffing, the laws changed to allow what were squatters, and I mean old-fashioned squatters, not farming squatters, but people who just squatted on the land like James did. They were actually then allowed to claim that land under a lease, but there was a condition of that lease that if you transgressed any laws and you're convicted of a crime, that land automatically reverted to the Crown. So this family did a big scramble and had that land transferred out of James's name via the help of some famous solicitors. So the deal was, it went to Henrietta for her life, then to her son William, the one she brought with her from Singapore, then to William's heirs, and then to William Younghusband as the trustee. Because back in those days, there always had to be an end beneficiary. If this one kicked the bucket, if this one died, somebody had to be in charge of that land. So young William Ilbery was killed in a tragic accident out on the farm at Floraville. He was actually crushed, very sadly. He was 6 years of age. So he's gone. He didn't have any heirs. Eventually, 11 years later, Mum's gone back to, she went back to India a lot sooner than that. She went back to India the year he died, but she still had that second son, Thomas. He wasn't included in that deal because he hadn't been born when that deal was put together, although I think he was cooking. So Henrietta's now gone back to India. She's died, and guess what? All that land reverts back to William Younghusband. So that's how he came to own the lovely Floraville as painted by S.T. Gill. There is also a lovely picture being painted by Henrietta Ilbery too. I don't have that.
It's on the website, Gawler History website.
Yeah, it is. I mean, I personally have it, I don't have it here. So when William came into town, he was in the middle of a depression. The bankruptcy was rife, trade was shrinking, there was no capital around, and there certainly wasn't any credit around. And he had this big cargo that he had to get rid of to people who couldn't afford to buy it. and no money to sort of get out of the trouble. So the other problem was, as we'll see here, there were no farms, so the colony couldn't feed itself. The early settlers were concentrated really close to the towns. They were waiting for the exploration and for the government to build the roads before they would go out and build farms. But the government didn't have any money. It was kind of a catch-22. So no farms or cultivated areas meant that the colony wasn't even able to feed its own citizens properly. And so there had to be a way out of it because bad governance had led to a debt crisis. And press this thing. Port Adelaide was declining, insolvency, as I said, was widespread. And William thought, I know what I'm going to do. I'm gradually going to get money from this cargo from the Fort Field, and it's my dad's money, but I'm going to hang on to it. And that's exactly what he did. So he used that credit to set up credit for other people in the colony. And he went out and he said to the wool farmers, I will give you a loan of this money that I actually owe my dad, but we won't worry about that. I'll give you a loan so that you can put more sheep to wool, you can buy more land, and that worked. The farming prospects in South Australia increased rapidly. He was under a lot of pressure himself. His dad was screaming at him about the money, but he decided that he would use his insight into emerging settlements, because remember, he's a traveller from around the world. He's seen what colonial economies look like when they're at their infant stages. He used his family shipping capital. Yes, Dad wasn't very happy about it. Dad was a grumpy man, so we don't care. He used his international trade contacts. He reconnoitred prospects in other ports to extend colonial trade. Now, he said to his dad, I reckon with some hard work, some careful trade, I can foster local production, I can export local production, and in 2 to 3 years I'll be independent. That was his strategy. So he did all of that, and then he bought in this ship called the Bling, and I want you to just check through and see if any of those things are on your shopping list today, like chemicals, cordage, peas, turpentine, raisins, iron, farm machinery, boxes. The boxes is interesting. All the way through that, I'm dangerous with this. All the way through that, you'll see boxes and cases. And he bought them in empty because the colony didn't have anything to send the exports back out in. We didn't have a box manufacturing company here. We didn't have a bag manufacturing. So he had to import boxes and bags and crates so that he could export our stuff back out again. It's a bit of a thing you don't think about very often, but I was quite puzzled why he was bringing all these empty boxes in, and then the more I read, I discovered that it was because we just didn't have it. So William went on, and I'm not going to go a lot into his trading business because it's all over trove. Professor Eric Richards has written a wonderful book about William Younghusband. It's a paper, William Younghusband and the Overseas Trade, and it goes into great detail. But I did want to show you this picture. This is another S.T. Gill painting, and I knew about this building. He went from working with Elders to Bunce's to all the other trading houses of the day, and eventually set up his own shop. And I knew about this store because the press raved about it. I'll read you some of the clippings in a minute. I could not find this store, and then the wonderful art historian David Coombe from Canberra said to me, I know where it is, because the press had described it as this wonderful commercial looking store with a turret. And if you look here, there's a turret. So we were able to place it, and the press had been describing it as on the corner of King William and Curry, but it was actually on the corner of King William and Gilbert. And I got so excited when I saw that turret. I thought, now I know where it is. The funny thing about that was, I worked for the tax office for nearly a decade and walked past the location of that building practically every day and had no idea that it had ever been there. So I got pretty excited when I finally was able to track it down. So, William is now past the Depression. life is getting a bit better, although as Margie Anderson of the Gawler, she's a historian at the Gawler Library, she recapped the situation and said, we had been relying heavily on imported capital, people and goods, but by 1841 to 2, through bad luck and bad governments, migration had slowed, and this inflow of capital had largely stopped. Did any of you happen to see the news report 2 nights ago that said migration is the only thing keeping our country's economy afloat at the moment? And when and if that stops, if Pauline gets her way and she stops migration, that we'll head for a recession. Just very interesting to be reading this at a time when our own community is considering stopping migration. Anyway, wiser heads than me will sort that out. So, there were some issues for William when he came here, particularly about finance. And at one point, he was refused credit from the Bank of Australasia, and he was furious. He wrote a very angry letter to them and said, "Why are you refusing me credit? I've been a good customer for the last 15 months. I've never had anything bounce. I've put £10,000 through your bank accounts in that time," which was quite a fortune in those days. "Why are you being so horrible?" And then I did a little bit of reading about that. I found out that the banks were actually very corrupt back then. And if you were well placed as a director or a high-powered shareholder, because they had shares in banks back then, or even a high-powered account holder, you could engineer those strategies to have your competition's finances blocked as a commercial strategy. So you needed to be fairly careful who you got into bed with as far as banking was concerned. So he wrote to his brother, this very distinguished looking brother John, he wrote to his brother John in England, who was connected with the board of the bank, and said, "Could you get me a position on the board of directors?" And within about 5 months, guess what? William's on the board of directors of the very bank which had refused him credit the previous year. So he was a happy little chappy about that. Okay, now back to William's store. This is what the press said. "The first sale held in Mr. Younghusband's new store took place yesterday. The company was numerous and respectable." I knew you'd want to know that. "And a considerable amount of business was transacted to the satisfaction of the sellers and buyers. The next report said, we were very much delighted with the new and pleasing features of Mr. Younghusband's large and commercial looking store with its octagonal turret. And the third report said, we've seldom seen anything handsomer or better worth the reported cost of the erection than Mr. Younghusband's substantial new store. There is an unmistakable completeness about it which is not often seen in a young colony." So there you go. You'll be as impressed as I was with Younghusband's new store. And I did find, I don't know whether I've got it on the slide. Oh yeah, this is a picture, a photo of King William Street. If you look carefully, you can still see the turret there. I can't place the year of that photo, but obviously somebody like Paul might be able to look for little clues, being a photographer extraordinaire. But yeah, there's the turret. So in 1845, William Younghusband and George Young announced a business partnership, William Younghusband and Co., with offices in King William Street and Gilbert Place. This was a wool broking and shipping business. William could see that South Australia's future depended on shipping and had to move from being import dependent to one capable of producing exportable surpluses. And he had well and truly adapted to the fact that South Australia's necessities were manufactured locally, but they could be manufacturing more. They could have an export surplus. And so that's why he was so enthusiastic to offer credit, for a charge, of course. I mean, he wasn't an angel, but the colony was going broke. He needed it. I'll read you a little bit about what he wrote to his father in later times. What did he say to his dad? He said, I'll paraphrase him because I can't find it right now, but he wrote to his dad, who was a grumpy old bugger. I mean, you would be if your son withheld all the money from your cargo, wouldn't you? But he did eventually pay it back. But he wrote to his dad and he said something like, "We would get along really fine if you didn't do your chewy every time you didn't make a fortune on your first attempt." That's basically what he said to his dad. Oh, I thought that was beautiful, you know, put Dad back in perspective, that this young lad's out here having a crack. He was only quite young, he was 24 or 25 at the time. Dad was coming down on him like a ton of bricks. In fact, Professor Richards believes that from going through all of Younghusband's letter books in the Mortlock Library, that William actually came out here, as did Edwin, to get away from Dad, to establish his own independence, because Dad was a total tyrant. Sorry, Grandpa. But he was a total tyrant, a really mean man. So in 1845, William's wife, Louisa, and 2 daughters arrived out here on the Blenk, and that was the cargo I showed you before. Grumpy Grandpa had written his will to say William was going to get nothing. Grumpy Grandpa's will went on for 8 pages, and that was just listing all the stuff he owned. And there was a lovely term in there, "And I bequeath my ships and my parts and my shares of ships." I'd like to be able to write that in my will, wouldn't you? You know, wouldn't that be fun? And he listed all of his houses, and it was going to this son and that son, but none of it to William, because William had disgraced himself in Dad's eyes, although that wasn't fair, because the biggest stuff up that happened was actually Edwin's fault, but Edwin didn't own up to it, and he laid the blame on William's shoulders, and so Dad always thought William was the goof off, but in fact it was Edwin. They later proved that. So a codicil to the will was written 1 month before Dad died, and someone, Mum maybe, persuaded him to leave his estate in 4 equal portions to the 4 boys. So now William is suddenly quite wealthy. But in all fairness to William, he had created wealth for himself before Dad's will. So he didn't just inherit wealth and then off you go. He had created a lot of wealth for himself. As he wrote to the bank and said, you know, "I'm a wealthy and substantial landholder in this town now. How dare you be mean to me?" So from that point, he bought the Crystal Brook Run. He bought land at Mount Remarkable. He invested in the Burra mines, made a fortune from both the mining and shipping the copper out. He built his own wharf. I don't know if any of you know that, but there's a wharf in Port Adelaide called Prince's Wharf, which he and Mr. Edward Collison built because the wharf facilities there weren't sufficient for shipping all the stuff out of South Australia. So he did quite a lot. I'm not going to go into the navigation of the Murray stuff. That's been written about ad infinitum. He bought his horse out on one of the ships, and then he imported many more horses and bulls. But he wrote a letter to his brother, and he said he hoped he would receive this large opossum rug, which you will perhaps not value the less from its having been both bed and blanket to me for many a night, whilst my saddle for a pillow I quietly sleep at the foot of a gum tree during my travels through the bush of South Australia searching for sheep runs. So he wasn't just an idle little rich kid. He did actually go out and deprive himself of some joys and pleasures. In fact, he wrote to his dad and said, he wrote to his brother and said, what happens in South Australia in this new colony is you have to give up all the trappings and privileges of life, which for people of our class, and that's the term he used, is quite a treat. So I don't know whether he was being facetious or whether he was saying, I'm quite enjoying it. So he took the lease on the Crystal Brook Run, which he later sold for £50,000, and at the time the property ran 25,000 sheep, 3,400 cattle and 2,000 horses. And you might say, why did he need so much in the way of horses? Because everyone went everywhere on horses, including William. There was a nice homestead built there, and it's sadly been trashed now. It was blown up, it was dynamited just for fun by vandals, but it was quite a substantial building at the time. So what else did he do? Oh, here's some news, and somebody can enlighten me about this because I've not heard this before. In January 1846, a new mine is to be developed in Gawler. A great sensation has been created at Gawler town with the last few days by the discovery of a mine, and said to be a very valuable one, in the immediate vicinity of that township. The manufacture as well as the smelting of lead is likely to be prosecuted with success in the colony. The pig lead produced by Mr. Carlton, Mr. Bean's successor in the smelting works at Hindmarsh, is a highly merchantable form and will doubtless soon be added to our list of exports through the active agency of Messrs. Younghusband and Co. Does anyone know that we had a lead mine here in Gawler? Anyone ever heard of it? Anyway. So, in 1847, he put his fine house in East Terrace up for sale, and the description said consisted of a dwelling house with handsome drawing room, dining rooms opening onto the lawn, 9 other good and convenient rooms, a carriage house with stabling for 3 horses, a garden that is well stocked, and 3 acres of land in cultivation and having 3 frontages. And this is good real estate agent stuff. It said, it would be suitable to the new buyer for a tavern of the first respectability, for a seminary or a very superior order, for the foundations of a colonial college, or for the residence of a gentleman with a large establishment. Very good. So he did sell that, and he used the proceeds of that to build, I don't know whether I've got a picture of it or not. Oh, so this was his house on Strangways Terrace. And this is also pretty flash. Had large and commodious rooms, a bay window, multiple arches. Wing of the house had an arcade of arches opening to the elements, many underground rooms and passages, a ballroom, thank you, on the ground floor, cedar fittings to every doorway, window, skirting and alcatraz, and cedar floors throughout the building. So the famous South Australian architect Kingston built that for him. He was also agent for the Van Diemen's Land Company and was letting the company's land in Tasmania. So he's flogging off blocks. I tell you, there's nothing this man doesn't do. When he was involved in the Burrum Mining Company, he was chairman of directors of the Royal Mining Company. They actually built this little town called Armagh just outside of Clare. And that was for all the workers at the mine. And he wasn't to know that about a year later, news of the goldfields in Victoria would reach Burra, and all the workers tipped off and went to Victoria, so they weren't very happy about that. Some of them did return later, disillusioned, but they took off. Now here's something that I don't know whether you knew or not. I certainly didn't until I discovered it recently, that William was bringing in Chinese workers and servants. His whole farm out there at Floraville was run by Chinese servants, not a white man in stock. And then everybody started to put up their hand for some Chinese workers. So this letter was written, and it says, most of us are now on the eve of sending to Singapore for Chinese to shepherd our sheep. The experiment has been tried by Mr. Younghusband, whose station I have visited and found well conducted. They do what they're told, are careful of the provisions, extremely so, and cost only £16 per annum to run. He has some 12,000 sheep and no white man amongst them. This is really a salvation for sheep farmers. Chinese can be got in any quality. They cost us £6 per head to bring them over, deducted from their wages, do you mind? They've agreed for 3 years at $5 per month. This would be about £13 per annum. So, and at one point, the colony was so hard up for money that people were emigrating from this colony to go to China. You'll find that in Trove too, that they were getting on ships going wherever they could, but particularly to China, because the prospects there looked better than the prospects in Adelaide. I didn't know about that. Hands up. Did anyone know that people were emigrating to China? No. Okay. Now, the next thing I want to talk to you about, the great scandal, Younghusband versus Gillies. William Lewis Gillies, brother to the colonial treasurer Osmond Gillies, was sued by Younghusband for defamation of character. Gillies' niece had claimed that William attempted to seduce her. He denied it. Now, I will let you in on a little secret. In our family, in the family history researchers in our family, we call him Wandering Willie for many reasons, not just because he was an explorer. Nautical miles of column inches were devoted to this subject in Trove. You can read hours and hours and hours, and every detail of that court case is covered. Everybody who had a pen wrote to the press about it. Every editor wrote about it. There was commentary on and analysis of the motives and motivation, the morality, the conduct of both parties. It was analysed to within an inch. Just like in the Lindy Chamberlain case, really, probably worse so. And then, this didn't help. William Younghusband, Esquire, was horsewhipped in Adelaide by Dr. Morton, fiancé of Mr. Gillies' niece, Fanny Morton. Now, this Dr. Morton, do we have any Morton descendants here that can explain this? No, bad luck. We're not going to know, are we? Because the court case was very inconclusive. They found that the defamation was true, but the facts of the case were true also, so both parties got somewhere on it. So the assailant, without any warning, struck Mr. Younghusband a severe blow with the butt end of a whip on the right temple and was proceeding to repeat it when he was caught by Mr. Younghusband, who placed his head in chancery and inflicted upon him a very severe punishment. There was tons and tons written about that too, because it was just so unbelievable. This happened out the front of the Exchange in Adelaide, not far from where Parliament House is, I do believe. And this all happened because when William Younghusband took over Floraville, he never actually permanently lived there. It was kind of like a holiday home, a floating villa where the powerful, the rich, the influential would float in and out. So they would come and stay, including his brother if he was over from England, and all the knobs and hobs in Adelaide would come and stay there. And this one night, he decided to go into Fanny Gillies. She was Fanny Gillies, then married, became Mrs. Morton, to go into her room. And the inference was made that something naughty happened, and he denied it. And she said yes, and she was about to get married, and anyway, it went on and on and on, and it was... So that tells you a little bit about his personal life. I can tell you that he also had 2 illegitimate children, one of whom is how we come to be descended from him. Well, not me personally, but my husband's side of the family come to be descended from him. And the other one was, her mother's name was something or other Morton. So I don't know whether something eventually happened between Mrs. Fanny Morton and William Younghusband or not, but one of his illegitimate children had Morton in the name. So that's why I was asking if there are any Mortons in the room, or Morton descendants. It'd be good to get to the bottom of that one. But I will say, he did look after his illegitimate children. He left them money in the will, not a huge amount. His Thomas, the one whose mum went back to India and left the little boy with William and Louisa. Or something interesting I didn't tell you about that. When Thomas's birth was registered, his father's name was listed as James Ilbury, and his mother's name was listed as Henrietta Younghusband. That's on the BDM record, so that's why I'm a little bit sus as to who actually fathered that little boy. So the next thing we get to is William's political life, and I'm going to have to wrap up soon because we've rabbited on a fair bit here. But I just did want to show you this wonderful letter written by the electors, and you had to qualify to be an elector. But they said, "Sir, the extensive interest you possess amongst us in pastoral and agricultural pursuits in the counties of Stanley and Gawler, and your commercial experience, your thorough knowledge of business and position in Adelaide render you, in our opinion, eminently qualified to represent our views and opinions. And we believe in your integrity and your independence of character, and blah, 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 and we want you to become our candidate and we pledge ourselves to the utmost of our power to advance your election. Now, that's the letter. Can you spot any of your ancestors in there?
No caballeros.
No oh, that's not fair, Larry. Is there a single? I mean, there are some luminaries in there. There's Alex Fotheringham, there's William Paxton, there's Henry Ayres, there's Walters, there's George Young. This dude here is the captain of the opium ship that brought Henrietta out. Do we know any of these names?
Yeah, what are we looking at them for?
Well, we want to know if any of your ancestors are. We know yours aren't, because they haven't come out yet.
James Fotheringham?
Have we got a Fotheringham descendant?
Yes. My great auntie married James Fotheringham.
Well, your great uncle wanted my great grandfather to elect him. Now, hands up if any of you have ancestors that didn't vote for William Younghusband. I want to know. So yes, he was elected. He was elected, and he represented the district of Stanley, which was a huge electorate from Mount Remarkable down, basically. And he did a damn good job. What sort of things did he get involved in? Well, one of the first things he put forward was a proposal to pay off the colony's debt before spending any more money. And there was a lot of argument about that, but in the end it was carried. Shut up, Larry. He came to Parliament then with a letter from a group of investors in England who said, "We've got the capital, we propose you install a waterworks and gasworks in the city of Adelaide." You know what happened, don't you? Maybe. So they blustered and bluffed, and it took another 12 years for Adelaide to get a gasworks, and by then William was dead, but he had the capital, he had the investors ready to go, and we were just too scared. Now here's my favourite thing of all that he did. It won't be important to you, but he set up the colony's first travel insurance company, who were admitting on equal terms person of every class and degree to all the benefits. We are combining advantages for the living not to be found in any former or existing company. I don't know whether I've got anything about... Oh, we'll get to that one in a minute. No, we haven't got it up there. There's no extra charge for going to or residing in the Australian colonies in times of peace, or Bermuda, Madeira, Cape of Good Hope, Mauritius or British North American colonies, or voyages to Europe and back, or voyages to any of the Australian colonies. Now what about that? Fancy setting up the first travel insurance company in Australia. I thought that was pretty flash. You could get assurances granted against paralysis, blindness, accidents, insanity and every other affliction, bodily or mental, at moderate prices. Now, here's one of my favourite things. It was on the parliamentary committee that had to decide the fate of the Gawler Railway. There were several things they had to look at: the probable cost of the undertaking, the annual cost of working it, the difference in expense between employing animal or steam power. Are you with me on that one? The amount of traffic that will come down the railway, we could tell him about that, whether it's practicable to raise a loan to carry out the undertaking efficiently, and whether the resources of the colony are equal to meeting the loan. Well, we know the history. We got the Gawler Railway. Thank goodness for William. Then he sat on the estimates committee with Finnis, Dutton, Foster, Kingston, Reynolds and Younghusband. And this was the estimates committee to look at the way government expenditure was handled. I'm pretty sure this was actually a template for Elon Musk's Doge, because they went through every government department, looked at how much money they were spending, where they could save, what was wasteful, and they ended up saving $40,000, which was £40,000, which was a lot of money in the colony back then. He participated in the debate about the subsequent formation of what became the South Australian Constitution, and when we finally did get our freedom, our independence from the British, he became the Chief Secretary of South Australia, our first ever Chief Secretary of South Australia, because prior to that, all of the decisions were generally sent off to England. We had people here in those jobs, but mostly the decisions were made in England. So as Chief Secretary, he was responsible for organising all of the government departments, the official papers and records, transcribing public dispatches, making out grants, leases and every other official transaction. Being the first administration formed subsequent to the disappearance of the old officials from public life, it fell to Mr Younghusband to organise the various government departments inaugurated under the new regime. This he did with consummate ability, and for many years the public business of the colony was transacted on the lines he laid down. Now, I didn't write that, that was Professor Eric Richards. There's one other thing he did that impressed me. He put up a bill to abolish public executions, and he fought hard for that, and it was granted, it was assented. So I'm going to summarise him a little bit now, because it's kind of time to wind up. You're going to sleep and so am I, because I sat up late last night. But let me just say about him that he adapted quickly to the colony's broader opportunities. He saw that his first role was to bridge the gap between local producers and distant markets. Although he arrived as a mariner and a merchant, his interest soon extended into pastoralism, landholding and mining. He bought land, invested in sheep and cattle, searched for sheep runs and eventually helped build the substantial pastoral holdings, including the Crystal Brook one. When he arrived, the colony was depressed, undercapitalised and uncertain of its future, and he identified the potential of export production and used mercantile credit and shipping networks and entrepreneurial judgment to support the local producers to export to international markets. His success was not only personal, it demonstrated how merchants helped shape the colony's transition from dependence on imports towards an economy based on wool, wheat, copper, pastoral expansion and overseas trade. His public career reflected his sound education as the son of a wealthy family, but also his training and capability as a master mariner and the experience and the standing he gained through commerce and investment during the colony's formative years. He established the first stable administration subsequent to the disappearance of old officials, and he did this with consummate ability. Now, he was far from perfect, let me tell you. I know a lot more dirt about him than I've told you tonight, but on the whole I think he did a good job. What do you think?
Yes.
So that's William Younghusband in a nutshell for you. Do we have any questions?
Yes, Julia.
Yes, Rob?
Younghusband in the Riverland, is that named after?
Well, here's the thing that confuses a lot of people. He was not an explorer. What actually happened back in the day was, when you controlled the purse strings, and he did, even though he wasn't colonial treasurer, he made the decisions about what exploration would go ahead. A clever explorer would come along and say, please, William, I want to go out and explore that thing, and if I find it, I'll name it after you. Can you give me some money? And there's Younghusband Peninsula, there's Mount Younghusband, there's Younghusband Township, I've counted nearly a dozen of them, all named after him. He didn't discover a single one of them. He funded them. He funded them.
Any other questions? Yes?
Yeah, just a comment. My parents and grandfather came out to live on Floraville in 1914 and managed property. At that stage, it was owned by the Sanderson family.
That was his daughter's husband's family. His daughters married very well, actually. One of them married Dominic Gore Daly, the governor's son. One of them married the Shipsters, they were lawyers, very wealthy, and one of them married into the Sandersons, they were wealthy as well. But poor old Floraville actually got burnt down, and the jury sort of decided, well, no one's really responsible, but apparently there were a couple of kids there smoking, and people in the district on adjoining farms saw the smoke and thought, oh, somebody's burning off, but nobody actually went over there. It was pretty derelict by then anyway.
Yeah, it's only the fourth owner of the property there now.
Sorry, what was that?
There's only been 4 owners to that property.
Yeah. So it doesn't exist anymore, but let me tell you, it had a colourful life while it did exist. Lots of, they went fox hunting. Did you know that? We had fox and hounds there, and all sorts of wonderful parties, and people were entertained there. Yeah, it was a very interesting property. Sad it's not there anymore.
Yeah, there's quite a few derelict building sites on that property.
Sorry, what was that?
There's 2 or 3 derelict building sites, like a heap of rubble here,
Yeah.
another one there,
Yeah.
various sections of the land.
One of Ilbury's descendants is actually an author, well, I think he's passed now, but he was an author and had a distinguished military career. And he contacted me about 20 years ago and said, I've got a painting from Henrietta of that property and I'd like to donate it to Gawler Council. And I spoke to the then historian and he never heard anything more about it. And then I spoke a couple of years later to another historian and eventually he gave it to Gawler Council. I do believe it's a copy, not the original, but it's apparently a very good copy. But he wanted to go out and have a look, so I took him out there and he was very disappointed at what he saw, because as you said, it's just stones and rubble now. There's sort of nothing really to indicate its former glory.
Well, one of the houses is being done up by Ian Sanders, did it up. So that's, otherwise that house was suitable to bulldoze, and he took it on and built it right
And
up.
we mustn't forget there is a little boy still buried on that property somewhere. It has excited a little bit of interest, but no one's ever been able to find him. So
We have on the Gawler History Team site, we have some photographs on the Gawler Farm page that Peter Wimpress organised. He went with an expedition, you could call it, many years ago. But it already looked like there was rubble there. You suggest that there's a building there that Ian Sanders has restored.
Quite a good building, yeah. Sheds and everything.
Does he still own it, or are the new owners now?
No, we sold only 12, 18 months ago to who's the Italian people down.
are you sure that was actually part of the original Floraville estate?
Section 15, 16.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Because the river ran right through the middle of the property. There was land both sides of the river. I learned to swim.
When they put the property up for auction, when James Ilbury went for jail, that was one of the features. They said it's watered all year round. It's the best watered property in the state.
Wow. Oh, that's great. Well, thank you very much, Julia. That's been a magnificent talk on William Younghusband. I think that was magnificent. We've got a little bit of work to do now. We've got to find out where in 1840 there was a lead mine close to Gawler. So you've opened up a can of worms. Thanks very much.
There's plenty in that book, let me tell you.
Which book is that? What do you?
My book here with all of the dirt with information on William Younghusband.
So when are you going to be putting that into a?
One day.
Okay.
One day,
Is that after your grandson's grown up and you have more time?
probably.
All right.
When I retire, whenever that will be.
Oh, great. No more questions just before we now, on behalf of the Gawler History Team and the guests, we have a little gift basket that we'd like to give you.
Thank you.
So thank you very much.
Not a little gift basket, thank you. That's
So
wonderful.
once again, we'll give Julia
Thank you very much.